Peace. 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 Yeah, so I want to breathe a little bit out. There's a lot going on. Um, just very interesting, I said. You hear me say that all the time. But it seems like it's always something new. That's the thing, you know. That's the other thing about, holding stuff in, that I've owned for so long, as, one of the master teachers of our subculture would say, Brother Dr. John Henry Clark, all knowledge of the world belongs to all people of the world. And that's something that, you know, I learned about myself early on as well, being a student of life, trying to discover the origin and purpose of all things, is that, you know, every human being, every being, period, has something very unique to teach us about, life, how it manifests, how it evolves, so that's why I'm astute, and I could pay attention. Like I said growing up, I study everything and everybody, you know, beginning and ending with myself. So, it's just all to say that. And like I've learned again, man, especially like I said, bro, being around new people and, whether it's online or in person, some of the stuff I be saying, people be like, dang, bro, that's deep. Or it's like last week at work, I brought up one of the approaches that I use, and my unique approach to health and human services. And I guess I'll share it here. Like I said, it's in the approach and the books and stuff and my trainings, but I call it rebonding and rebranding relationships, so it mostly applies, when I'm working with, parents of children who've divorced or never together. Or sometimes I work it with parents, whose children are evolving in their stages. You know what I'm saying? Like your little adolescent is going to be different when they're in their teens, So, in a lot of ways, it's like you have to reintroduce yourselves to each other and learn each other. And, so whether it's parents and their children or intimate partners no longer being intimate partners but having to maintain a friendship or a connection, I call that process rebranding and rebranding. And especially in our culture and community, that is a common thing. So that's what it is where it comes from. But it's just all to say, I said that, and one of my colleagues from a different department, brought it up a couple of days after, like, bro, the past 3, 4 days since you said that, I've been using that, I've been applying that, I've been teaching people, and again, outside of the business part of it, my intellectual property, my approach is unique to me and this, that, and the third. That's what makes me say that, from Brother Dr. John Henry Clark, to not hold this stuff in or not protect it unless I can sell it. You understand what I'm saying? So that's one of the themes, this latest video I want to make sure I speak to, again, for whosoever will hear it, can help them out along the path. And like I said, I feel like, in a lot of ways, I have an obligation, you know, introducing this content, that some people may have not otherwise, known or, applied. So, yeah, I want to talk about that. And I guess that'll lead into, finally feel like I'm at the spot where I'm embracing, what could come as far as being, in the public sphere. But, and again, preferred title that I like to accept is civic leadership. For one reason or another, anthropologically speaking, all human systems sometimes either rise or fall, depending on the leadership, whether it's parental structures, coaches, presidents of organizations, nations, and all that other stuff. I've been studying that for a very long time. And again, since I'm putting it all out there and this is it, man, I'm telling you, bro, just like my spiritual experiences, it's like I was subtly but directly prepared for this since childhood, and also helps me to accept that, like, yeah, bro, it's part of my mission kind of deal. And I never forget, at my old elementary school, which again is a long story in itself. If you heard my life story, people, remember me talking about that first time, what I'm saying, I was promoted unknowingly and the impact that it had. But I remember, I think it was in my either fifth grade or fourth grade class. It's just this subtle moment, where I'm looking up, along the borders of the classroom ceiling. And, the teacher had it decorated, with all of these, historical figures, like MLK and all of that. And it's just one subtle moment, you know what I'm saying, without words, just an energetic knowing, like, damn, bro, that's what I'm supposed to do kind of deal, you know what I'm saying, is to provide that kind of presence. And, especially with how I grew up and, certain language, especially in mental health, they like to call that being grandiose, but every step of the way, every stage of my life, you know what I'm saying? Even when I felt the lowest, the least attractive, even convincing myself I'm dumb or incapable, it just always felt like this is what was happening, to almost in a way keep me humble and steady on the path, as opposed to being haughty or, absolutely corruptible, like a statement I heard just this morning studying, a clip about, human nature and culture. And it was just so powerful where the person said the difference between the American ideal of integrity versus the American reality of corruption. And again, as a researcher, educator, and practitioner, well, it's me. The first thing I'm hearing and pointing out is the separation, between this sweeping generalization saying all people are this or all cultures are that, they can be a norm of a culture, but it'll never apply to everybody because there's always exceptions on what we will call the micro level, of each individual. But very much so, especially in these times where we've come from, where we are, and where we're headed, that is the thing, that's the theme, and that's why with my work in public health and public safety, it's one of the things I'm most passionate about and want to grow to contribute to however things go, which is what they call public integrity. You know what I'm saying? People in civic leadership positions who violate the trust and use it to serve themselves and not serve the people, So that's something I've always been about. And again, what that's going to lead to, which is theme 3 or 4 that I want to speak to. Like I said, this might be a little longer one. But again, in the subculture, in my literature, I like to call it community members. You know what I'm saying? Both on the positive and the potentially negative end of that continuum, where it's like community members from the neighborhood, it's like community moms or community dads, the grandma on the block, whether they're her biological family or neighborhood family. They're a community mom or community dad. There's a spirit inside of them, but, also, like a very popular song that went mainstream, OPP, that also applies to, community lovers, for better or for worse, you know what I'm saying? Open and engaging multiple partners, it ain't always negative, you know what I'm saying? It's like, again, community dads, community moms, taking care of kids regardless of they're yours or not. Um, on the other end of the spectrum, you have people, again, engaging the community in that way, whether for profit, recreation, or whatnot, you know. And the reason why I bring that up is because, again, in my theory and my assessments, those are literally like 95% of the people who run for office and get in these offices are community minded people, And one thing about community minded people, in my assessment, again, as I say, they got a lot of nerve. You know what I'm saying? You got to have some kind of nerve to have the expectation of, putting yourself in a position to lead, to be heard, things like that. And same kind of people are the people who, again, rise to the ranks of the industries, who have that desire, again, to not just help and serve, but to be seen and be heard, and especially the people who followed me all this time, that just innately I'm not that kind of person. I don't think I've ever been or ever will be. I'm comfortable leadership, people looking to me for inspiration or, information or guidance, but it's not something that I really seek out or ever sought out. It's more, again, like the spirit of things. It's a calling. So, again, bro, it ain't like that's been changed. And like I said before, I've fought it a lot. I've had individuals, unions, and organizations helping me to stay out of the way and to, try to take me off the path of, being public figure, civic leadership, and all this other stuff. But, like I said, I feel to the point that I know that it's always been, a part of why I'm here, you know. I guess I'll wrap up because the fourth thing, like I said, bro, I'm telling you, bro, just last night into this morning, that's where a lot of the work happens. Those of us who are mystics know, but, and like I've said in a couple other of these videos, the culminations, understanding what this was all for and the reveal and things like that. And like I said, bro, just this early morning, was able to really make peace and understand, with my second ex-wife, as I said in a couple of these videos, how long the story is and how impactful, it was. But it's just so fascinating when I connected the last dot. I feel it's the last dot, not just for her, but for all of the experiences, both intimately and what I just talked about on this macro level, me coming into people's lives, not for my reasons or how it impacted me, good, bad, or ugly, or the indifferent, but mostly it's for them, you know? And there's like five main themes, and I just won't get into all of it again to protect her privacy and my own, but she reached out again recently within the past couple months. Get into it, but we're living apart and separate, don't really have a connection anymore. But, it was a lot going on. And, what she told me was affirming, validating, but also confirmed, a lot of what I said. She had going on, what was going to happen, good, bad, and ugly. And sure enough, that's kind of what happened. So, just again, this morning I was able to connect those dots and accept that, like, yeah, bro, those were the 5 reasons, that I came into her life. And the good, the bad, the ugly, for better and for worse, she affirmed that that was it, and the purpose has been fulfilled, like I said about the other ones. So once those purposes are fulfilled, like I said, just like with all my relationships, that means, at least for me, I am free to move on, you know? So, yeah, so I guess I'll start there and just go in reverse. Like I said, I'll make this kind of like the last entry, Tree of Love series, because like I said, I'm very much ready to move on, however it looks from that as well. And like I said, again, let's protect her privacy and my own. Like the others, I'll just try to speak to mostly, supernatural and paranormal elements of the connection, you know. Um, so yeah, I remember. Again, it's just so interesting, bro, because like I said, with the foreshadowing and the precognition of them all, like I said, how I can discern from who was called and who just came. It's like, bro, for several years, I had got her number, and each time I would just look at the number and the name and just stare at it. Not quite sure what I'm feeling or what it's meaning, but I'm knowing it's meaning something. And I'm telling you, bro, this was a couple years, because what it was is, like I said, again, culturally speaking, spiritually speaking, mostly, my hair always been long. I only cut it a couple times in my now 45 years. And like I said, if native and indigenous and different other metaphysical realities, that's the reason why, So it's just all to say that, especially with my culture, that I always knew eventually I, get my hair locked, dreads, And each time, throughout those years, I'll be asking my mom, because she used to braid my hair, along with a couple other, leaves and branches and one of the roots on the tree of love. But it's like every time in those years, I would ask my mom, like, if she knew anybody, if she had anybody, and the girl she would go see would give her that number, you know? So the third and final time, because like I said, about the locks, it's like it's supposed to be, especially interlocking, either take them down or you have to cut them out. So it's I always felt like, yeah, when I'm ready to get it, I gotta, keep it kind of deal. So that's why I would have it the first 2 times, but never reached out. But that third time again, it was the most powerful. I'm just sitting staring at this woman's name, staring at her number, and I'm like, bro, it's something. But again, I obviously wasn't thinking about it. I'd already been through enough, with women, so I wasn't thinking it was that kind of connection. But sure enough, again, I'm called, scheduled, and that first connection of the eyes, it was something there. You know what I'm saying? She obviously, physically my type, so I'm attracted to her. But especially at that point, me being me, and again, the, alpha sphere stuff, the men's empowerment, as we would say, like, bro, you gotta take years, literally years, to get to know somebody, because of that difference. Like I said, between just spending time versus sharing lives. So that's what it was, bro. This was like, what was this? Yeah, because it's interesting. It was right after the connection with my first wife, faded, you know, to the degree where it was time for us to move on, and seek other options because neither one of us could, fulfill the earthbound physical expectations. I said we just couldn't get on the same page to share our lives with each other. But, again, humans need that kind of support if that's what you want. I'm that kind of human. So once I got the clearance that it was good to move on, this was 2014 into 2015 because it was my last semesters of graduate school, So again, it's like barbers, the hairdressers in our culture and community are, like pseudo therapists and ministers and best friends and all that other stuff. So, connecting with her, we getting to know each other, having these subtle vibes, like, yeah, okay, yeah, okay, kind of deal. So, sure enough, for me, bro, like I said, I call it scouting, for lack of a better word, you know what I'm saying? And that was one of the first things when I, almost a year into knowing her and her, doing my hair, I was starting preparing. I called it measured advances. You know what I'm saying? So fast forward, that's finally got that energetic confirmation like, yeah, bro, there's something in this. You know what I'm saying? And I finally, talked to my interests and, very direct. There's another thing we say in this approach, like, yeah, I really would like to see you, if you're interested, some things you like to do, and I like to do that with you, you know. And it was one of the very first areas of growth, you know what I'm saying, which is another theme, especially in the twin flame essence twins. I don't use divine counterpart anymore because the divine counterpart is the other half of you. That's what all of this is for. These people on your path always help you to bring you back to you. So to help you to merge the masculine and feminine essences inside of you as the Great Spirit once did when it first separated. That's bringing it all back home. That's the fractal recreation of the origin and purpose. So, there's healing that has to be done, very specific in a lot of different areas, but it's physical, mental, emotional, social, and spiritual. So, like I said, bro, her being her, of course, you know what I'm saying? And me being me and where I was at specifically in my life, very first thing she said, I want to go to the water. Let's go to the water. And I cringed at first because, again, part of my story, I don't know if I said it before, but, I almost drowned twice growing up. First as a little guy, which was the most impactful. Again, that 0 to 7 years of development. It's fascinating. Rest in peace to my auntie because I'll never forget that. Again, just being a kid, running, jumping in the pool at, one of the extended family members from our church community. She had a nice pool in her backyard. So, we would hang out there. So I remember being a little guy, running and jumping in. And like I said, bro, my feet couldn't touch the bottom. And I started drowning. And like I said, started panicking, trying to scream. Because again, my voice, I used to be able to scream like a girl. Every time I try to scream, water coming out. So, bro, I'm literally drowning. It's absolutely terrifying, but almost like a spiritual metaphor. I felt these arms like scoop me up out of the water, and I'm just seemed like I'm floating on top of the water. And it brought me to the ground and handed me off to my auntie, and it was my cousin. So my oldest cousin. You also hear me in these videos talk about, my cousins that were like my brothers, and this was the oldest one. So, like I said, we always had a connection, because of that, because he literally saved my life, bro. I was drowning. And it was so interesting, again, study of everything. But rest in peace, my auntie, because she kind of made me mad as a kid. Because the very first thing she did, bro, I'm sitting on a thing, wrapped up in a blanket, just shivering, you know what I'm saying? Terrified. And she tried to pick me up and take me right back to the water. And I'm just whimpering, crawling on top of her head like on a cartoon, trying to get away from it. But like I said, without words, because it never really explained it, but I knew the reason she did that, because she knew I would be traumatized. She knew I would be scared for the rest of my life, if I didn't get back in, kind of deal. But I fought against it. And like I said, it's been one of the great traumas of my life, one of my great phobias, you know what I'm saying? Because of, that developmental stage, having that trauma happen. So, again, fast forward, the same thing happened again. I was, I think, in my early teens, and I was probably a little, drunk, because I started early. We was at some kind of hotel for some kind of reason, and my joking ass again, running and jumping in, feet couldn't touch the bottom. And, but luckily by that point, I had a little wherewithal to where I could, swim a little bit and get myself over, you know what I'm saying, to the deck, you know. And I got pulled myself up out of there, went and sat down, and I ain't never been in the water since, you know what I'm saying, at least not to the point where I could, feel the ground, So again, all that is significant, telling that part of it, because again, that was one of the things, she being in my life forced me to face my fears, and me wanting to be with her. I ain't gonna first thing and first date say, no, I'm scared. Let's do something else. So yeah, bro, wanted to go to the water. So sure enough, we set it up. I went to one of our favorite metro parks again, because again, that's why they call us the Great Lakes State. We got the big five Great Lakes, as is more like they say, inland seas, damn lakes, big ass bodies of water, with all kind of energy. I don't go there. Don't get me started on that. But so yeah, we went to Metro Park, and that was another supernatural paranormal experience. And like I said, she's a mystic in herself, obviously, because like I said, another one of those videos. That's where arranged marriages and energetic connections, like in royal families and all this other stuff. You literally just can't be with anybody. The energy won't allow it. It's some deep stuff. But that was one of the things for me to her. Helping her to expand in that and get her on her path. And then what she chooses up to her. That's part of the ending story. But yeah, bro, we go out there and get on this doggone paddle boat. And it was just so funny, bro, because again, I'm just terrified, bro. I'm trying to keep it together. I'm terrified. And, I'm a big, broad dude. So, even the biggest little life jacket damn near fit on me. So I had that thing, across my chest. And they got us our little paddle boat with the swan. And, bro, I look at this thing and put my big ass foot on there and just felt it through the bottom. Like, yeah, bro, it's in. And I flinch back like this. Again, a neurological trauma response. And this woman being this woman, her ass just busted laughing at my ass. So, I laughed at it too, but I had to tell her the story. It's like, bro, I had a lifelong phobia of water, and this is the reason why. But that was one of the very first things, again, because that was one of our strengths from beginning to end, as we communicate very well, very specifically and very directly. And that was the first thing I told her, like, girl, it would take somebody like you in a situation like this to face this fear. Because like I said, if you did not say this is what you wanted to do on our first date, it ain't no way in hell I would get on this thing. Even by myself, let alone with another person, bro, you know? So damn, 30 minutes already? Yeah. Okay. So yeah. So again, that was the depth of it, but also what happened next, bro. And we talked about it in real time. Like I said, bro, our conversations and our connection was so deep on that doggone paddle boat. And this lake is so big, relatively speaking. But bro, it was like we was quantum leaping all over that lake. You know what I'm saying? It's like literally we talking. We at the start right here where the deck is. Next thing you know, we're all the way over here on the other side of the lake. I was like, damn, bro, wasn't we just here? And then we start talking some more and pointing stuff out. And it's like, nah, we all the way over here. It's like, bro, okay, this is not possible. How is this happening? Kind of deal. So, pointing it out, this, that, and the third. And, you know, again, had a picture of us. I ain't going to share our pictures because, like I said, it's a longer story. Um, but yeah, so that was our first experience. And then, we got off of there. I ran her through some yoga, Pilates poses, you know what I'm saying? So we connected with that because she, liked and trying to be more fit. But which is another theme after that was the straight opposite. We went to a barbecue spot. You know what I'm saying? And finished our 7 hour first date there, And it was really good. But like I said, I was at the point where, like I said, bro, I'm trying to get clean, vegan vegetarianism and stop drinking and all this other stuff, stop smoking eventually. And it seemed like she was that way. But like I said, she's a reflection of me. And that's what she said, at the end of the day, we sitting side by side, just staring into each other. And she just shaking her head. It's like, damn, bro, it's literally like looking and feeling in a mirror. It's like you are a reflection of me, kind of deal. And yeah, that can be beautiful when it's beautiful, but when we reflect in the sides of us that's dark and anti all of this, that's why it wasn't sustainable. Even though we tried, mostly off and on, almost 5 or 6 years. That was ultimately where we struggled and had to end. And like I told her, it was never about the love. Love is unique. I love you, you love me. And like I said, because again, she's like 5 years older than me. So, like she said, especially, the times I hurt her and stuff like that, she'd been married for 16 years, bro. And had all kind of relationships, even had, same sex relationships, other women. But she would always say again in her direct and specific way, like, bro, you are my first love. You're my first love. And I know I've been married. I know I had this, that, and the third. And the way she explained it is like, you know, she said it's easy. It's effortless. I just love you because I do kind of deal. It's like all my other relationships, it's like I'm with her or with him because of this, and I'm with him because of that, this, that, and the third. It's like I'm with you because I really love you. You know what I'm saying? I've never felt this before. And that was one of the things that, again, that I had to accept eventually, especially as the years passed and the stuff I had to own, about our, relationship, our marriage, and our connection. And she said, like, bro, even that man I was with for 16 years, nobody has hurt me more than you've hurt me. Nobody has let me down or put me down more than you have, And yeah, she had her challenges, her trauma, this, that, and the third, but some of that stuff I did have to own, you know what I'm saying? So, yeah, that's pretty much the summary. Like I said, I won't get into, the powerful experience and the role I played, in helping to raise her kids, you know what I'm saying? at pivotal times for them. But that was one of the five themes, like I said, that she would obviously bite back on, just like some of the people we counsel, don't realize that, counseling has nothing to do with our personal or private experiences. We counsel from evidence based techniques. It's not because I think this or I feel like this is what you should do or this is the best. You get your ass in trouble doing stuff like that, So, especially the closer I got, with her two youngest kids, who was the ones in the house. Her older was out of the state at that point. Um, but yeah, she brought that up like, yeah, how you gonna tell me about raising some kids? You ain't got no kids, all this other stuff. But she said, like, like I said a couple months ago, like, yeah, bro, I hear what you're saying now, and I know what it meant and I know why you were doing it, kind of deal. So that again was one of the four themes that, eventually, especially as we were breaking up for good, she just owned that stuff. Like, bro, all I can do is apologize and hope you'll forgive me. I know we're not getting back together. She wanted to either get together or just stay connected, like I said, on some poly stuff, you know. But again, it's just moved past and I was on a different path. But like I said, that was really affirming. And that was, like I said, just part of, you know, what I accepted this morning as like, yep, those five main themes was what, reason I was in her life. And she affirmed and confirmed, even though it was difficult, that I got it. Now that's my reason, and, thank you kind of deal. That's why I said that even with the challenges, with all of them, the love has only really grown because these were the purposes, that, we were connected. So, yeah. So, yeah, that's technically my last root lover. And again, I was wish her well, but the saddest part about it, and I'll just wrap up with that because I told her, bro, like I said, towards the end, because again, she had a lot of trauma. And she, just like all of them, it's the only kind of women I could really be around, even if it's a smaller part of them. She's just very sweet, just a real sweet woman, a motherly instinct. And a couple of pictures she took, I could just tell her essence and her aura. But, like we would say, because again, she from the city, and so you can't be a fawn living in the jungle. So, that sweet nature and stuff, energies, and people literally prey on that. So, especially with the women, that's why, especially black women in our culture and community, is why some of them can be so ferocious, and protective of themselves and their kids, because, we literally prey on them, try to take advantage of them, but where they struggle is they don't know how to turn that off and they don't know how to direct it appropriately, just like some of us, the dudes with our violence, and that's where she struggled. And, she would project it out to me, she would project it out to the kids, she would project it to my damn dog, you know what I'm saying? And slowly but surely I would have to intervene, as the man, and that's where we would clash, She wasn't trying to hear it. She's a single mom. She run her household and this, that, and the third. But eventually some of the stuff sunk in, but she just couldn't, maintain it. And I told her, like, after a couple relatively very disrespectful things that, I just don't stand for. I was like, girl, listen, 'cause I don't go back and forth and I don't argue, period, you know, for a number of reasons. But, I told her, like, listen, you ain't gonna have nobody after wrecking. You know what I'm saying? You keep giving in emotionally and treating people this way and disrespecting people and being narcissistic and hypocritical about this stuff, you're not gonna have nobody. Ain't nobody gonna want to be around you. The only people that's gonna be around you is the people like me who seen you, think you fine, or hear the positive sides of you, this, that, and the third. But eventually your talent's gonna come out and you're gonna push everybody away. and it's just crazy because, like I said, that's one of the last pictures we took. Again, just me, I'm a community person. So, you know, had no issue. Last experience was her birthday, which is 7 days before mine. Us both being Sagittariuses, and it was a really good time. Like I said, we had a really good time. It was, at one of her friends' house, family friends' house, and had like a what you call them things, like a paint and sip thing. Her ex-husband, who was the father of my two stepkids, you know, we was kicking it. We was bonding. We even took a picture together, all cheesing and stuff, talking about the kids, talking about her, but it was a real celebration, celebrating her, this, that, and the third. It was a really good time, again, I was technically done for good, but, she trying to keep the claws in me, this, that, and the third, even if we transition into more of a poly thing, And it was really fun, but something told me, like, yeah, bro, this might be the last time she ever has something like this. And here we are 5 years later, the one time we had talked, because we hadn't talked in a minute, she brought that shit up. Like, damn, bro, thinking about that, you know what I'm saying? Had, him there, had you there, had the babies there, family members there, and it was just such a positive thing. Now everybody's gone. You know what I'm saying? Kids that moved out, doing their own thing, going through what they went through with her, just like, some of our other parents. You're inevitably going to distance yourself, especially if you can't make amends and work through it. If that shit ain't never your fault or you making excuses for it. And I felt really bad, and obviously felt the urge to want to reconnect with her, come back to her for physical, mental, emotional, social reasons. But spiritually, that's what that was for, to affirm and, that, yeah, bro, she got it. What you foresaw happening exactly happened. So, like I told her, just like my life, let this be the foundation. Like J.K. Rowling said, let this be the foundation that you rebuild the rest of your life on. Own your shit and move forward, So, yeah, that was the last of it. I had two brief leaves after her. Obviously, again, it's more spiritual, energetic, but like I said, these two young women, had a lot going on. And like I said, I'm pretty much an afterthought, and they can't really connect on the levels, to maintain the connection, you know what I'm saying? So, yeah, the last root lover and 2 to 3 leaves I had since then. It's kind of like, wow, yeah, bro. I really think I'm done, bro. You know what I'm saying? For real, for real. It's like a lot of the men, like I said, going their own way, It's just a lot in it. It's just a lot in it. So, yeah. So that was that story. I think that's enough of that. Um, the other themes I talked about with what's going on, this is 43 minutes. Like I said, bro, just always, felt like I said in my CCH approach capstone course, it just felt like in my life I've always been dragged what I call a glass lens, because like I said, I'd been around celebrity in the industry at various levels and stuff like that, and especially my experiences, starting with security work and eventually party promotions, and then doing a few shows here and there and all that, and observing, the A down to the F lists and all of that. And that's why I came up with that term, the glass lens of celebrity, because it's like these MFs ain't nothing but MFs, just like all us other MFs. But especially when you're in the physical environment as them, when it's a show or a party, this, that, and the third, you know what I'm saying? It's like, bro, they here with everybody else just like everybody else. But it's like you used to seeing them on the TV. You understand? So even if that person is physically in the same environment as you, people are viewing them through the lens of the television. That's why neurologically they be going through so much. It's like Michael looking ass. That's the power of not just celebrity. This is neurological, sociological stuff. And that has just always fascinated me. But it also affirmed why I ain't want nothing to do with none of that stuff. You know what I'm saying? Why I struggled with it. Um, so yeah, just to say all that, like I said, it felt like I dragged into the glass lens. Like I said, Poltergeist looking ass. Um, so again, started with my rapping, and like I said, this is way back, bro. I'm talking about mid to late 90s, you know what I'm saying? To my mid to late teens. That's when it really got started. Still in high school, and like I said, we take that stuff very seriously, just like my sports. You know what I'm saying? If I'm ass and a half, I'm just ass. But when I'm cold or I'm good, bro, I'm cold, and that's what a lot of reputable people said, especially, I put my EP together, put it out doing shows and shit, like, bro, nigga, you better than the best rappers that's out. You know what I'm saying? And like I said, me going through the traumas I went through and socialized to the underworld, this, that, and the third, is on a level of, Slim, you know what I'm saying? Eminem and Biggie and Pac, and you know what I'm saying? It was on that level. And like I said, people was really rocking with it. So it's just all to say that that was one of the things. Like I said, it's kind of all out there now for one reason or another. But there's mechanisms at each level. Gatekeepers and all that other stuff, and being objective about it, rightfully so. You got to show and prove certain things if you want to get in certain clubs and have certain opportunities. It just is what it is. And we would see that and talk about that, because again, every little region, local rappers, all this other stuff, especially when the A and the B list swoop through, people get picked up, literally and figuratively. And some of them come back with stories about, yeah, MFs wanted me to this, and them MFs tried to do that, or these MF actually did this to me. And if I see him again, I'm going to kill him, kind of deal. Or I just don't want nothing to do with it. Others didn't come back. And, the stories trickled back down to us about, why they didn't and why they're on the TV now. This, that, and the third. But like I said, for me, like I said, bro, I just had a lot going on. Spiritually, especially, but also socially. That's why, I would get to a certain point, um, and there would be this barrier either imposed on me, or I would make the decision like, yeah, bro, nah, bro, I'm straight, bro. Until I put it down for good, which is more of a spiritual reason. Again, I talked about it, in my capstone course of how, again, I just didn't want to put that kind of negative energy out there, and that's not how I wanted to live. Um, but yeah, the reason I'm bringing it up because it is coming back around, and for whatever reason, whatever the reason, and whatever avenue happens, I'm probably going to, just put it out there, like I said, as a product, as an opportunity, as a revenue stream, whatever, and, just making peace with it, however it comes. So kind of getting ready for that because, like I said, I had the music first, and again, in my own way, let's just say a couple of those women in my tree of love, like I said, are part of the industry, part of the environment. So that kind of pushed this reputation, about me out there, and as we would call it, a sphere of influence, you know, Some people became more supportive, others became more combative. And that's also what I mean when I say, people been literally molding their content, their products, and even how they look or take pictures based on my life, and for me, it's quite obviously, and especially where I've grown up from, insulting, but also for the energy of it all. Like I said, bro, that's, the law of the return, karmic balance. You know what I'm saying? You can't energetically capitalize on a person's essence without you, A, giving yourself access to that person. You know what I'm saying? You taking it from them, but you're pretty much giving me permission. I won't go that far, but energetically, that's just what time it is. I won't go that far, but that's been a lot of what's been going on. Um, so, yeah. And the last thing related to that is like I said, bro, I wrote a book, that was loosely in some areas based on those experiences in my relationships and my tree of love. But I gotta admit, in other areas, it was directly based on my experiences. You know what I'm saying? Um, but yeah, yeah, and that's coming back around as well. Like I said, I'm more interested in that because, again, like I said, it's not just the story in the book, but I developed like 5 to 7 original songs, and just like the book, music and melodies and lyrics. So I've just been haunting me in my head, like, bro, I gotta put this out, this, that, and the third. And I just feel like with everything going on, finally ready, again, to just put it out there and leave it out there and try to, turn it into products. And again, ain't just for the revenue, it's the energy, like I said, creativity and all of that, feeling stifled, doing the work that I do without having the ability to create, you know what I'm saying, with my music and my lyrics and stuff like that. So that's probably one of the biggest reasons I'm feeling now that, like, yeah, bro, before all of this, go down for good, I at least want to do this, and give the opportunity, like I started talking about, if I don't share, you give people the opportunity to experience it. So that's one of the reasons why I want to do that as well. So yeah, close to, I definitely ain't going on no damn hour. So I think the last thing, what was I talking about? Talked about that. Talked about that. I think I did talk about that. I think that is everything. Is that everything? Yeah, I think so. I guess I'll just finish up with because again, it's very interesting with everything going on. Um, Within the past month, like I said, highly invited energetically, allies, councils, courts, and cathedrals to watch the original Star Wars again. Because, like I said, I'm an 80s baby, so naturally, as a kid, just like sports back in the day, it's just next level stuff. But, just like I talked about the Harry Potter movies, there's some really powerful themes in those movies, especially when you talk about the Force, And that's something I notice and said all the time, I'm saying? Both the light and the dark side uses the Force, It's a singular thing, and that is the clearest depiction and description of God. It literally is, like we say, all divine energy is neutral, until it's animated with an action. And that takes me back to, again, the very first musing that I had was kind of like a theme for my whole life on earth and my connection spiritually. And again, it was almost channeled, and like a summary my mom would say, me growing up saying stuff or asking questions that didn't have no answer. And I'll never forget that moment, bro. Like I said, I don't know how young I was, but I was young enough that my mom was still towering over me. And I just remember looking up at her like, I think the devil is just God when he get mad. And obviously she couldn't say nothing. And I'm just thinking about it like, it's interesting. And again, the Abraxian essence and everything else going on, let's just say it's the start of and another theme that's come full circle, about how I experience life, and the essence of all things, and all culminating into this big transition and this big reveal. That's kind of like the summary of it all. So, um, yeah, that's why choosing who you are and which aspect of it you want to engage and create from, because all things are available here. It's just, this shift that's taking place where, environments, just like individuals, prefer one or the other more than anything else, and this is no longer going to be an environment where both are available, when the big has to happen. And that's why, just like the soul extraction and soul identification and extraction process, like on Midnight Special and the movie Knowing with Nick Cage. That's what all of this was about. So yeah, I won't go that far because it's culminating, and decisions are still being made. So yeah, that's pretty much everything. Um, really feel like I'm ready now. So like I said, putting all this stuff in place. And like I said before, it was initially under my protections, especially because I wasn't pursuing this stuff. Um, but it's just proven, like I said, people appreciate me and respect, what I got going on. And needless to say, it's just like gang, and cartels and all that other stuff. It's one thing to have followers, it's something completely different to have competitors, and the bigger you get when you have factions and stuff like that, that's always the biggest threat. It's like, yeah, this person could usurp my power, and the people that fear me or love me and do my bidding, they can start doing his or hers. So I have to kill this person. That's just the way it goes. But this is deeper. Like I said, this is a lot deeper, speaking to the Star Wars part of it, and all of that has been sorted out at that level. You know, I am what I am and I do what I do, and light and dark, above and below. You know, everything is in place. And like I said, this is just the last of it here, physically with the humans and the earth. So that's enough. Peace, bro.